Hi guys, Alan Gookin here. Just giving a little heads up on how my project came to fruition. So back in September, we did assignment number 2, and we learned a whole lot about acoustics, and I studied in depth about architectural acoustics in my band hall and how they impact the way that we perceive sound. And originally, I did a comparison of 3 places in my school where my band practices and rehearses and performs, and I decided I wanted to do a little bit more in-depth study of these spaces using a really cool online tool, and that rhymed. I just realized that, and I'm really sorry about that. But it's called hyperphysics, and that led me to better understand the factors that come into play when determining why these rooms are designed the way that they are, and why those designs are so important to us as music educators as we do what we do. So, without further ado, let's talk about boingy, boingy, boingy. Reverberation time. So, reverberation time is extremely important to consider when you're designing a music venue from an architectural standpoint. There's several factors that come into play when determining reverberation time, from the room size and shape, and even the configuration of it. The floor, the ceiling, wall construction material, and the shape of that, all the way to the furniture that you put in the room and the paneling that you put on the walls. Those all have a big factor in how the sound is absorbed or bounced around or reflected or diffused, or however you want to consider that. Even the number of people that are expected to occupy the room makes a difference in how it's designed. All the way to the intensity of the sound source itself. For example, when you're talking about the room size and shape, you want the ceiling height to be pretty tall. Generally speaking, the ceilings for a band, you want it to be between 18 and 22 feet for optimal sound to travel and bounce back and not come straight back at you really super duper fast. So ceiling heights are generally tall in most band halls that are designed correctly, or at least the ones that have been designed in the last few years. Now, the configuration is also important. For example, my room is set up so that the band faces the widest part of the room. That way, it allows for weaker lateral reflections so that I, as the director, can hear a lot more of the direct sound from the kiddos rather than whatever's bouncing off the walls and coming back to us. It allows me to hear things a little cleaner and be able to fix things and really refine my entrances and exits and articulations and stuff like that. But some band halls are left open to kind of however you want to do it. This is just kind of how we chose because it sounded the best for us. Construction materials are also really, really important, as we said before, in determining the reverberation time. They all have different sound absorbing coefficients at different frequencies. For example, at 200 hertz, or not 2000 hertz, excuse me, different materials can absorb sound differently or at different levels or different amounts. My band hall has painted center block walls, and the sound absorbing coefficient of that material is a 0.01. We've also got what I think is a concrete floor with tile on top of it, I'm assuming, and that's got a coefficient of 0.03. As opposed to our gym where there's a wooden floor and that coefficient is 0.15, so it's actually absorbing the sound better than the tile that's in the band hall. We also have suspended acoustic tile all along the upper part of the band hall that's basically foam with a fabric covering that has a sound absorbing coefficient of 0.7 versus what we have in our gym that has a coefficient of 0.6, and those are those rigid acoustic tiles that are framed and mounted on the wall. They're rigid, and they kind of look like a basket weaving sort of looking material in there. We have that in our gym. A lot of older band halls have the same thing. It doesn't serve as good a purpose, but it generally works to do what you need it to do to get rid of all the excess bounciness. And also in the gyms, we have wooden benches. Now, the closest thing I could find to that was the coefficient for wooden pews for, say, a church. But it's kind of the same, and it has a coefficient of 0.8. So there's various surfaces that have various amounts of absorption of sound, and that's just at 2,000 hertz. It could, anything ranging from 4,000 down to less than 1,000. So that can definitely make a difference in the level of sound bouncing around the room when you're rehearsing. And of course, like I said before, the number of people makes a difference. The ideal for a performance space for a band, you want anywhere from 20 to 35 square feet per person available to that hall, and that's a lot of space. So not a whole lot of people have that, but that's optimal for what you want to do. And of course, last but not least, the intensity of the sound source itself. Simply put, the louder you sound when you first make the noise, the more it's going to bounce around the room. So we have Mr. Wallace Sabine. Wally came up with this great formula back in 1898. It wasn't actually published until 1922, so almost 25 years later, for calculating reverberation time. And, obviously you can see on the screen, it's a pretty complicated formula. Looks like a whole lot of hieroglyphics and Greek or whatever on there. But I'm going to try to do my best to unpack it a little bit so at least it makes more sense, even though it's still fairly complicated. Simply put, reverberation time is the measure of the time that it takes in seconds for a sound to decay by 60 decibels from its original level. So basically, when the sound starts till the time it's 60 decibels quieter, from that original level, that's your reverberation time. So it's on the surface level, pun intended, is a pretty simple concept. But then when you look into these the variables in this equation, it gets a little crazy. For example, that first factor, K, it can be either measured in regards to feet, where it has it in the formula itself, or you can change out that for the 0.161 for meters if you're using a more worldly scale. But volume, of course, is your standard volume, length times width times height. It gives you your volume in meters squared. But then we have this crazy A, whatever that A is. A, you would think it's originally your surface area, but it's surface area including the absorption coefficient that we talked about earlier, or attenuation coefficient, same difference in this terminology anyway. Little a is your absorption or attenuation coefficient, and you multiply that times the surface area of that item, and that gives you the A that we use in this example. And of course, that coefficient is going to be determined not just by the material itself, but by the frequency that is being absorbed. So it gets really crazy, and you can see now why these architectural engineers who design performance spaces make a whole lot more money than I do. So yeah, so there you have it, Sabine's formula. Little swirly thing, forgot to show you that at the beginning. Anyhow, so moving along. Now, I challenge any of you to read the title of that slide and not think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but I just thought it was funny. Anyway, so generally when we're doing, well, what we're looking for in sound for our spaces that we want to perform in or rehearse in, we think of in terms of a live room versus a dead room, and that changes the way that we perceive sound. And sorry, that was supposed to say change, not chance, but a little bit late for that now. But generally, when you're performing, you want a really hot room. You want it to bounce around. You want it to be really echoey. It makes you feel better when you're performing it. It sounds cooler. It kind of blends in the ends and beginnings, and makes it sound smoother to the audience, or at least we perceive it as such anyhow. But when you're rehearsing it, you don't want that at all. You want it as dead as you can possibly get it. So we do different things to different spaces to make them accommodate what we're looking for. So, for example, we have practice spaces that we affectionately call as the band hall, and some people call it the band room or whatever. But we use different architectural materials in there to deaden that space and basically eliminate as much reverberant sound as humanly possible. If you can eliminate it completely, that would be awesome, but we know that's not really possible. But the ideal is working toward a cleaner sound so that all the performers can hear all the nuances across the ensemble that you can't really pick up when you have a really long reverberation time. We do that by the height of the ceiling, the size of the room itself, but we also use different acoustic tiles and panels like we were talking about before. Now, modern companies like Wenger and other groups like that have come up with different configurations of tiles to put on the wall. Now, back in the day, we talked about earlier that there's those flat, rigid panels that they put on the walls that kind of look like basket weaving kind of stuff, and they do work, but they don't do as good a job as what we have now, where they put a combination of flat panels as well as arched or curved or zigzaggy kind of panels that are mounted in different directions that basically deflect the sound in all kind of different ways and end up making the sound kind of fizzle out before it gets a chance to bounce around too much, or it bounces into each other to the point where you don't hear it come back to you anymore. And that's by design. It allows for more of the reverberant sound to be wiped out so that you hear more direct. Now, the opposite is what you want in a performance hall, of course. Performers, like I said, they want a little bit more reverberation time for aesthetic enjoyment, but too much is never a good thing as well, just like anything else. Ideal reverberation times for pretty prominent venues tend to be anywhere from 1.7 to about 2.05 seconds of time that it takes for the sound to come back to you. For example, Carnegie Hall is at that lower end at 1.7. Symphony Hall in Boston is about 1.8 seconds. And then I'm going to butcher the heck out of this, so forgive me, but Music Wahrenstall. Anyway, place in Vienna, that's the one that's at the 2.05 seconds. They sound beautiful. They're great for performing groups to do their thing in there. But too much can also be a real bad thing. You only have to look so far as the example of the Star Spangled Banner at a sporting event that sometimes has up to a 6-second delay that can really cause some crazy things going on in the course of singing the national anthem. So that can be a little messy if you're not paying attention. But let's go back to that middle part. In the middle of this slide, where we're talking about practice isolation rooms or modules or however you want to call it. Their main function is to isolate the performer inside from the sounds outside in the band hall, and vice versa. You generally want a soundproof room, but the concept is the same as far as what you want inside that room. What you want it to sound like. You want it to be as dead as possible, just like the band hall. Due to the small dimensions of the room, we've got to include sound absorbing panels in there of some sort, because we're talking really low ceilings. Most of them have between 7 and 8 foot ceilings, and they're tiny rooms anyway. And that can be a recipe for disaster. With small rooms, sound can reflect and return in less than 30 milliseconds, making the room really, really loud, unresponsive, and can even result in hearing damage for the performer. So what Wenger does is alternate reflective and absorbing panels that result in a slightly shorter reverberation time than you'd have in the band hall, just for the nature of what they've got in there. It's more, you're closer to the room itself, and a lot of that sound just gets sucked straight up in those absorbing panels. But they do a pretty good job of what they're intended to be for. So they're really beneficial for that purpose. So I had some really cool videos that I was originally going to show you from my previous exercise, but the computer gods don't like me, so I can share those with you at another time if you'd like. However, I do have some really cool sources that I used for this project. One is Hyperphysics, and that's the one that I've referred to earlier. Hyperphysics is a page that's hosted on the Georgia State University servers that has a whole lot of really cool physics and science and mathematical resources on there. So if you're ever interested to go geek out in that way, feel free to visit that website there. Also, there's our lovely text from Tan and all the lovely writers at Psychology of Music, From Sound to Significance, that helped me out when we were doing the exercise back in September. That really, it's been a great read. I've enjoyed it so far. There's another one where I was learning different ways of calculating the reverberation time at Singspiel Audio. That the website is there, that you can check that out as well. And last but not least, the huge source of information that I got was a lengthy planning guide for school music facilities and construction and renovation of buildings from the Wenger Corporation on just exactly what goes into the design and the concepts behind all their paneling density of materials that they use, and how all that stuff comes into play. So it really kind of painted everything in a really interesting light. If, again, you are interested in those videos that I had on there, I believe I posted them on the website before, but if you want to see some really cool videos that I made of a dorky trombone player playing some trombone excerpts in different venues at Ojeda Middle School, please hit me up, because they're really neat videos and I'd love to share them. They just won't fit on this thing. So other than that, that's it. I really appreciate you guys' time, and thanks for watching my video. I enjoyed learning with you guys, and I hope to run into you in the near future. Have a great one. Thanks, guys.